Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Nikisha Ricks Pettyjohn. I'm a director with our national network on our government affairs team, and I'm thrilled to host a network call along my two colleagues, Jaren and Caroline. So we're coming to you today to share some insights and some updates that we hope will empower you in your work and advocacy efforts. Whether you're joining us to stay on top of the latest DC news and developments, or you're just trying to connect with your peers, you're in the right space. We're so excited to have this time to connect with you. We'll jump right into our agenda, and in our formal manner, we'll save questions for the end of our discussion. Next slide. All right, so I want to start off with just a recap of our June meeting. Just some go over some key policy updates that are shaping the workforce landscape. So first, reconciliation. We discussed how those measures included important provisions and slashes to workforce programs, skills development, and safety net programs that are essential for providing holistic supports to workers and learners and providing those pathways to those good jobs. Caroline will share a little bit more and updates on reconciliation shortly. We also talked about all the executive orders that were coming out of this administration. We talked about the executive order preparing Americans for a skills trades. This EO was focused on expanding access to high demand skills trade pathways, including apprenticeships. It gave directives to three agencies, labor, education, and commerce, around aligning and streamlining programs and initiatives, which also we've seen that align with the president's request to consolidate certain workforce programs into Making America Skilled Again grant programs, MASSA. Third, we also talked about appropriations. Megan, who's not with us today, she's somewhere nice on the beach, provided an update and a landscape about the workforce programs and also some safety net programs and how the allocations have changed from prior fiscal years. And then last, we talked about the president's budget. We shared how the proposed budget highlighted priorities around workforce education and skills development in the upcoming fiscal year, but failed to address some of the critical areas that we needed for an opportunity to invest.
Thanks, Nikisha. That was one of our largest network calls to date, and we appreciate how engaged you guys are and how informed you guys continue to be. Now that we've recapped June's network call, the president's budget, and we discussed its implication for workforce investments, let's turn and hear from Caroline, who will take a closer look at the final reconciliation bill, starting with key changes to SNAP that will directly affect individuals and families in the communities you guys serve.
Sure. So, hi everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. As Jaren and Keisha mentioned, my name is Caroline Trishita. I'm a senior government affairs manager here at National Skills Coalition. So, keeping track of everything that is moving through Congress and the administration having to do with workforce. And we last had one of these network calls in June, as Nikisha outlined. And at that point, we had only seen the House's version of reconciliation. We hadn't seen the Senate yet. So, of course, since that network call, the Senate released their version of reconciliation, and eventually a final version was signed into law by the president on July 4th. National Skills Coalition has released tons of analysis of this bill that I really encourage you all to read. There's one really long blog post that Megan and I wrote that delves into some of the issues that you see on the screen. And then our colleague, Melissa Johnson, also led a really incredible webinar about the implications of reconciliation for states. So I'm going to keep it pretty high level in this recap, and for further information, just encourage you to check out those two resources. But as Jaren mentioned, starting with SNAP, the law expands SNAP work requirements to apply to adults ages 18 to 64. There are certain exceptions, but at National Skills Coalition, we know that work requirements focus on participants getting any job, which tend to be low paying jobs without the opportunity for growth, just so that they can keep their benefits. Work requirements have not been shown to be effective for helping people access the training and skills that they need to get a family supporting job. So that was one major change. The other major change with SNAP is the transfer of costs to states. So it increases the state administrative cost share from what was a 50-50 split between state and federal to 25-75%. And it bases that on the state's error rates. So this kind of shift is going to force states to decrease benefits or shift funding from other areas of state budgets to compensate for the changes that are coming up in 2028. So that's SNAP. Moving on to clean energy here, the reconciliation bill claws back funding and eliminates or phases out early tax breaks for clean energy programs. Wind and solar energy are particularly hit the hardest, and this jeopardizes or rolls back what were really exciting job growth mechanisms. We did some research and found that there was 2.6 million jobs projected to be created by the investments around these energies. And in fact, a recent analysis from Politico showed that cuts from the reconciliation are going to impact 600,000 jobs. So again, definitely check out Melissa's webinar. She has some great guest speakers that go more into how the clean energy field will be impacted. And then with Medicaid, like SNAP, there are new work requirements for Medicaid. And with these changes, fewer people will qualify for benefits or be able to afford health services. And we know supports like healthcare are critical to success in training programs and the workforce. So just a couple more top level reconciliation recap here. The CTC child tax credit is permanently increased to $2,200 and will be adjusted for inflation in future tax years. However, the refundable portion is capped at $1,400, which means that the people that could most benefit from the credit, including those who are pursuing training and education programs while balancing their family life, won't be able to take advantage of it. And then finally, education. On the education side, we saw a short-term Pell pass, which I'm going to talk much more in depth about shortly. However, despite this one win, there are many changes that may negatively impact the ability of people to seek training and education throughout their careers, including instituting federal loan caps. And so this we know can kind of halt upskilling, and it can help workers from achieving their full set of dreams and full education pathways. So again, that's a quick reconciliation recap. Just wanted to keep it high level and kind of acknowledge where we are in this moment. And so that is what has happened in Congress since we last spoke. But also what has happened is there's been some movement on appropriations, and Congress is on recess right now, their August recess, and we can expect them to pick up the appropriations process again once they return in September. So let's do a quick recap of appropriations too. So neither the House or the Senate has gone through all 12 funding spending bills. In general, the Senate bill for the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education is where we're going to see many of the programs that we follow most closely. And in sort of good news, it is kept close to level with spending for the current full year. So again, Senate we see mostly flat funding. Of course, we know that with inflation, this is really effectively a cut. But in a Republican trifecta, sometimes flat funding and playing defense is, a win in itself. And to not see any major cuts, that's a victory that we can celebrate together as a network, because that means that we have successfully shown to the Senate how important these programs are. In other good news, you all might remember that the president in his budget request proposed consolidating workforce programs under one large block grant called the Make America Skilled grant. In good news, we do not see the Senate follow this path. We see them, each program we see has an individual allocation, and that includes Job Corps, the Senior Community Service Employment Programs, and the Adult Education programs. Those are 3 programs that the president proposed cutting, and it's really good to see that the Senate did not follow that path. And then also in an unusual move, the committee listed separate allocations for adult education and career technical education. These programs are traditionally funded as a single combined amount in legislative text. But with the administration recently delaying fundings for adult education and proposing to eliminate adult education, it's inspiring to see that the Senate kind of doubled down and said, okay, no, we want to make sure that there's funding for adult ed. And then just a couple programs that I wanted to note specifically where there were cuts was around the WIOA adult program. You can see a cut of 10 million, or about a little more than 1%. A cut for reentry employment opportunities of 5 million, or 4%. The Senior Community Service Employment Program has a cut of 10 million. But you'll see that adult ed was plussed up, proposed, and the career and technical education was also plussed up at 12.4 million. The maximum Pell Grant award is proposed to remain at 7,395. Pell continues to be a critical financial resource for students who are seeking to enhance their skill sets and seek higher education. And finally, something not on the slide here, the bill proposes 94 million for earmarks, also known as congressionally directed spending under the Department of Labor. This is notable because previously they eliminated this type of spending for DOL projects. So it's great to see that it's back. Let's see, next slide here. So we haven't seen the House bill for the Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education. We've only seen the Senate. We expect to see the House release their bill in September when Congress returns from August recess. However, we don't think the House will have as good of news as the Senate did. We know that, I think the House is probably where we're going to see more conservative and more expected cuts. But it's important to note that Congress only has a month when they return to pass the full year bill funding for the government. And complicating things further is that Democrats are frustrated with the recently passed rescissions package and are wary of working with the Republicans in Congress right now to pass a bipartisan bill, only for another rescissions package to be brought up, eliminating funds that were approved in a bipartisan package. So for more information on appropriations, I encourage you to read my colleague Megan Evans' blog on appropriations, which includes this comprehensive chart. I know it's a lot of text, but just wanted you all to see all the different funding streams that we are tracking. So if there's one in particular that you take advantage of or want to see how it's impacted, you have all that information there. And I should also note that NSC led a letter signed by more than 200 national, state, and local organizations to congressional appropriation leadership, urging increased investments in critical workforce programs. So thank you if you signed on to that. I think it's encouraging to see the Senate, come in at pretty similar funding levels compared to last year. And hopefully we can keep that drumbeat up as the House works to move on it. And there's currently a similar letter circulating that is tailored to business interests. And we encourage our business partners to join that letter if they haven't already.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. And I see there's questions in the chat around the chart. So we'll be sure we have some infographics to show some funding streams. We'll be sure to share our resources update in that blog. Caroline, thank you again. Jaren, since we've mentioned our business partners, how do you see these changes impacting small businesses in particular? And how is Blue Business Leaders United working to address and activate network members around the current state of appropriations?
Thanks, Nikisha, and thanks, Caroline, for that really good in-depth analysis. First, I think it's important to note that one of the things that we don't talk about a lot is that most small businesses have some connection to the ACA credit or Medicaid. And actually, Small Business Majority did a really great report with the Georgetown University on like how that impacts. So if you want to think about strategically getting small businesses on board for some of the reconciliation package, I would suggest going to that report, and I can link it in the chat. And then also we know that small and mid-sized companies utilize the workforce system more than larger companies to support their development of a talent pipeline. So any cut to the workforce package is going to hurt small businesses in how they recruit and how they train. And I know this to be true because we just completed analysis of 75 companies in our research study on hiring needs of businesses. And what we found was that businesses pointed out they needed more funding for incumbent worker training, especially as technology changes, and that they need their workforce partners to have more funding so they have the capacity to support the small businesses in figuring out what skills are necessary for each job title, especially when you talk about the skills first hiring movement. And then how do you develop the curriculum that addresses that skills gap that's happening for them? And I will also link in the Blue Appropriations letter, but it's very similar to the National Skills letter. It's really focused on businesses and associations and how they can sign on to a letter that talks about maintaining the funding, increasing funding sources for training opportunities, talks about workforce Pell and the implementation of that, and then some data notes as well, things that businesses feel are very important to the work that's happening right now. So if you have business partners that you could send it out to, we'd love to get a stronger number of businesses and associations signed on to that letter so that we can showcase that this is not just a workforce stakeholder issue. This is an issue for all people that are stakeholders of the workforce system, which includes businesses. So let me put the link in that and feel free to share that out to all the individuals. If people have questions, you'll have my email and you'll be able to email me and I can answer any of those too.
Thank you, Jaren. So now that we've seen how appropriations are setting the stage for our workforce and education investments that are impacting not only just workers and learners and communities, but also our small businesses, we want to just go ahead and zoom in a little bit on a win, short-term Pell, a key opportunity to expand access to training that actually meets the workers' needs today. Us understanding short-term Pell is critical if we want to maximize impact and fight for equitable access across our communities. And I'll turn it over to our short-term Pell expert, Caroline, who will walk us through just some of the key details. Go ahead, Caroline.
Awesome. Thank you both Nikisha and Jaren. So yes, when I was reviewing the reconciliation bill, I mentioned that there was a small victory with short-term Pell, and I was going to go into more details. You know, it is a bright spot. It sometimes feels difficult to call it a bright spot when the rest of the bill has so many detriments for our workforce development system. But, you know, National Skills Coalition and our partners spent nearly a decade advocating for short-term Pell. And just to be explicit, that is an expansion to Pell grants to include short-term, high-quality programs to begin in the 2026 school year. So coming up really quick. These are programs that are less than 600 clock hours or 8 weeks in length. This will make many of the jobs that are the backbone of our economy, those careers that require either a short entry-level course to get started in or are available for someone who needs to rapidly reskill their career. It's going to make all those programs more accessible and more financially viable. It's also, to Jaren's point, going to help businesses meet their hiring needs by expanding the talent pipeline and the trained workforce. This is Congress following the lead and finally catching up to many states that have already pioneered efforts to fund short-term programs. Now, what ultimately passed in the reconciliation package is not the exact language or the exact bill that NSC has upheld as the gold standard for short-term Pell legislation called the Jobs Act. And these differences between the Jobs Act and what ultimately passed in the reconciliation package is going to make, as Nikisha said, implementation really important for workforce advocates. So we've got this chart here that outlines the differences between the Jobs Act and what ultimately passed. Again, you'll find this chart and outline in our reconciliation blog, but I just wanted to point out a few of the key differences where states and education leaders can expect to use their expertise for equitable implementation. So the first one, you'll see it in bold, is the exclusion of for-profit institutions. Jobs Act excludes them, the final law does not. For-profit institutions, unfortunately, have a history of leaving low-income Black students, brown students, low-income students with debt and credentials that are misaligned with local job markets. So that means that implementation with industry-aligned outcomes and earning metrics are crucial for equitable implementation. The next one I wanted to point out is industry or sector partnerships. Jobs Act had a little bit more of an emphasis on putting industry in the driver's seat by involving employers and industry partnerships in identifying and developing eligible programs to ensure alignment with real workforce needs and improving job placement. Not as much of this emphasis in the final bill, so making sure that you all as state leaders, as community college leaders, are connecting with employers and businesses to hear their hiring needs and developing responsive curricula is really important. And then finally, interagency data sharing. Transparent outcomes and earnings data helps students assess their potential earnings. It enables policymakers to track return on investment. So the lack of data sharing mandated in the final law might make it hard for students and businesses to get a full picture of programs offered. But on this front, around the data sharing, Congress has already introduced a bill that will help with some of that implementation when it comes to data. It's called the College Transparency Act. It's a bipartisan, bicameral bill led by Chairman Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana. The bill, if passed, as you can see here on the screen, would create a secure data system through the Department of Education to track student outcomes and program level outcomes. So for example, wage and earnings data by major can help students identify in-demand fields that lead to employment, helping to reduce that skills mismatch. So again, it would create a user-friendly online portal where students and the public can compare institutions by program, completion, costs, and outcomes. The data would be disaggregated by race, ethnicity, gender, income level, and veteran status. So helping us make sure that there are equitable results across programs. And all while having strong protections for students' privacy. And what's great is that it will then feed this information back to states and institutions so that you can have the data that you need to develop and implement targeted strategies. NSC has long championed passing workforce Pell with the College Transparency Act, which is why it's so exciting to see it introduced in Congress so soon after workforce Pell was passed. This is because CTA helps show which programs are covered under workforce Pell, which work well, and for whom are they working for. It also helps businesses identify strong education and training partners that are aligned with their hiring needs, and it helps community colleges understand the outcomes for programs they offer that are now eligible for workforce Pell. And then, when we think about quality standards, there are already quality metrics in place for programs to qualify under Workforce Pell. You can see them right here, but eligibility criteria alone can't guarantee consistently strong outcomes across institutions or student populations. So that's where CTA comes in, by just providing further details such as completion rates, post-program earnings, employment outcomes, and student demographics. So short-term Pell has passed, CTA is live in Congress. What is next for implementation? The US Department of Education has announced a negotiated rulemaking process to implement the higher education provisions in the reconciliation bill. So this will include short-term Pell, as well as the other higher education proposals, such as around student loan limitations on borrowing. The process includes creating 2 new committees. There's the RISE committee, which will focus on federal student loans, and then the AHEAD committee, which we'll be paying a little bit more attention to, which will address workforce Pell. There are sessions scheduled for these committees from September through January. There was a public hearing to kick off the process on August 7th, and then written comments to respond to the policies around best implementation are due August 25th. The NSC Government Affairs team attended the public meeting, and we will submit written comments based on a round of outreach that we are doing with our education partners in the field about short-term Pell implementation. And the comments will also build off of NSC's work on expanding the community college promise. We will also submit nominations for committee members by soliciting input from our network. So overall, really meaningful step forward that short-term Pell has passed. It will help more students and workers access good paying careers in fields that are facing shortages, but successful implementation will require continued advocacy from the NSC network, including technical assistance, and for more examples of successful implementation across states, you can definitely look at our NSC, our state financial aid report, which we'll include in the follow-up materials as well. So that's it for short-term Pell. But while we are here talking about the Department of Education, I wanted to provide some updates about what is happening with the Department of Education as well. I know we got a lot of questions about this. So since our last network call, many of you were impacted by the withholding of hundreds of millions of dollars in WIOA Title II adult basic education formulas. We know these are really important dollars that provide students with literacy and numeracy skills. And the sudden withholding of funds, kind of abandons students. It halts business education partnerships that took years to develop, and it threatens to shutter entire classrooms. The withholding of funds, again, comes after the president proposed eliminating ABE in his budget request. But in good news, that same money was eventually released to the states after being delayed. There are some new conditions attached to the money, mostly around immigration provisions. And the Senate did, as we talked about, reject the president's proposal to eliminate ABE. But, even with this sort of wrapped up for now, we want to outline that the withholding of funds and attempting to disrupt key workforce funding is a continuous pattern we've seen from this administration. So just want to give a call out to making sure that you're talking to your members of Congress about the importance of federal funding for workforce programs is really important. We also got a few questions about the interagency agreement between the Department of Labor and Department of Education to move career and technical education and adult education from Department of Ed to Department of Labor. So the administration has indicated that they do want to move forward with this. They made that clear in the streamlining workforce report that Nikisha will talk about in a minute. But again, we have seen the Senate and Congress kind of reject this movement. They're still funding things under the Department of Education. for now, which is, so there's kind of that tension right now between the administration and Congress. And we have also seen some lawsuits challenging this movement as well. At NSC, we of course support interagency alignment. It's critical, but drastic changes can have really wide reaching impacts and can be disruptive to students and providers. So any rapid changes like this have to be done in consultation with stakeholders so that we don't undermine programs' ability to effectively carry out their mission. And then, of course, we have our adult education expert, Senior Fellow Amanda Bergson-Shilcock, who has been active in the chat and has really been leading the charge to preserve our adult education funding. I know we got a lot of questions about ABE ahead of this webinar, so she is available to you if you have more specific questions. And I think that's it for me on Department of Ed. And I think I can pass it over to Jaren.
Yeah, thanks so much, Caroline, for breaking down short-term Pell and adult ed funding. Now let's shift gears a little bit to the executive orders and what they mean for workforce and skills policy on the ground. Nikisha, in our last call, you mentioned that NSC had a role in convening partners to meet with these three agencies on the report that has now been released. Could you share some updates with us on the report and maybe NSC's next steps in this?
Yeah, and I do want to just go into what Caroline was saying is like when we have big movement, it has to be done in consultation with stakeholders. And so that's what NSC is doing around the executive order preparing America for skills trade. So during our last call, we shared our role in bringing a few of our network leaders and experts to have what we call direct dialogue with the three agencies, which was labor, commerce, and education, as they were beginning to draft the report in response to President Trump's executive order. From that, we've seen the report. I think it came out last Friday. It's the American Talent Strategy, Building the Workforce for the Golden Age. From there, NSC will continue leading the efforts with the goal to build a workforce strategy in unison with these agencies that works for everyone. And the way we're looking at doing this is by continuing to connect our federal agencies with people and organizations who are actually implementing solutions in communities across our nation. We want to make sure that as these agencies start to work on the plans that are coming out of this report, we want to make sure that the federal workforce strategies are practical, inclusive, and responsive to industry by continuing to facilitate direct closed-door conversations with trusted partners. And we also want to say that this report is just more than paper, right? This is going to outline and have clear implications on what's happening on the ground. Next slide, please. So just to go over just some high level reviews that we highlighted in one of my colleagues, Katie's, and I'll drop her LinkedIn post when the report was released, just some highlights of what we've seen in the report so far. If you know NSC, we're a champion around industry sector partnerships. So we definitely seen a significant focus on industry sector partnerships and the calling of the workforce system into states to support these partnerships by leveraging, of course, industry expertise. We've seen for the alignment, the call for the alignment between workforce Pell implementations and the administration's vision for workforce. We've seen them referencing maximizing student success by navigation services, which is something that we have laid out in our prior WIOA recommendations for a skilled workforce. And then it was a recognition of the need of incumbent worker training, right? Understanding the need to upskilling, having our businesses talk to these agencies around the need to invest in our incumbent workers, especially as we think about the shifts in technology and the risk of losing jobs or change of jobs. And then, of course, there was an emphasis on earn and learn models with this administration and the agencies. So we see an emphasis that kind of matches the 1 million apprentice goal and that EO with an emphasis on pre-apprenticeship programs as well. We did see some challenges, right? Like we said before, and we haven't been shy about, there's a lack of investments in the system. We're asking the system to do a lot more with a lot less. And so not just investments in the system as we think about workers and our providers and our partners, but also those investments in those small businesses. Also, accurate measures, right? We have been doing data research and leading some data coalition work. And so we're just thinking about how do we expand beyond those federal measures? We've seen a list of the call for measures and reporting, but how do we expand them beyond the 6 performance requirements that we have currently in WIOA or beyond measures around wages, right? How are we truly measuring mobility of the workers? And I just want to say that these priorities aren't just on paper. We're viewing this as a living document, and we're continuing to have a relationship and strengthen and build deepen relationships within Congress and the agencies so that we know that this report is going to influence funding and programs. It's also going to give us a chance, NSC and the network, to advocate for fair, community-driven solutions and to work together across our network. So that way, as we're seeing initiatives roll out from this report and things coming from agencies, we can make sure our network is having conversations with the agencies beforehand, but then also we have a chance to shape the implementation so we can get it right on the ground. And with that, I'll go to the next slide and then I'll drop Katie's LinkedIn post in here for us.
And while you're doing that, Nikisha, Caroline, I want to check in with you. I know there's been a recent release of the administration's AI action plan. Are there any components our network should be paying attention to?
Excuse me. Yes, totally. And some of you all asked about this in our questions section of the registration form. So glad that so many of our network members are paying attention to this. So since our last action call in June, we've seen the administration release their AI action plan. Generally, at a high level, there are components that are related to accelerating innovation, building AI infrastructure, and leading in international diplomacy and security. We know that meeting these goals will take a trained workforce, and we do see workforce-specific proposals in the AI action plan. For workforce specifically, the administration goals are to advance a priority set of actions to expand AI literacy and skills development. They want to evaluate AI's impact on the labor market, pilot new innovations to rapidly retrain and help workers thrive in an AI-driven economy. More specifically, this looks like integrating and prioritizing AI readiness and training into existing funding sources, as well as creating an AI workforce research hub, and creating data reports on AI's impact on workers and the economy. So what does this all mean for folks on the line, for our workforce training stakeholders? First, it's important to acknowledge that this is the administration's priority. It's very clear from this action plan, but knowing how you utilize AI in your training or what AI needs are in your community will be vital for federal funding over the next couple of years. From the Department of Education, we've already seen that they will give grant applications prioritization in scoring if the application outlines how the entity will incorporate AI or how it will work to meet the AI workforce needs. So stay tuned, and back to you, Jared.
This is all landing so much because of some of the stuff that we talked about in our business research was a lot of things around digital skills and AI. So this is super helpful. How about what's next? How does our network take action on the things you guys discussed today?
Yeah, Jaren. So I just want to say that NSC is here to support our network and our partners every step of the way. We'll continue tracking federal agency updates. We'll continue to have conversations on the Hill. We'll also be providing a transparent updates through our blogs or our LinkedIn posts around us submitting comments and our engagement in the meetings. What we're also going to do is just start working, continue to work across networks and connecting networks to help coordinate a larger advocacy strategy as we think about amplifying voices. So We'll, NSC on Government Affairs team, will be in touch with our networks. That's our state network, our Workers Voice network, and of course our Blue, on recommendations on, as we think about short-term Pell and the changes, that's the immediate action we have. How can we coordinate with Caroline to ensure that we're sharing our public comments with you, and then also providing assistance as necessary, or templates or roadmaps on how you can do the same. Also, we want to encourage you to continue submitting your voices to us through our story collection. Those stories are meaningful and powerful, and we're using those in different avenues. And then also sharing the appropriation letter, sharing it with your networks of other organizations, sharing it with things that are in your communities, but then also challenging some of your larger business partners to sign on board as well, so we can amplify voices. And then lastly, just staying connected with us through our issue areas. We're going to have news threads, email threads. We're going to have LinkedIn posts. We're going to have a lot of things that are going on social media. And so staying engaged with us, or even tagging us in things, brings things to our attention. And then that way we can see what's a sense of urgency for you as well. So continue those engagements. Before turning it over to Q&A, I want to thank Jaren and Caroline, but I also want to just thank the network, everyone who signed on to this call today. It's a Monday, so I want to say thank you for joining us. We hope this discussion was valuable. Again, some other actions that we ask you to take away today is this recording will come out to you from our team. Share it with 5 people who are unable to make it today. Share it with 5 people who you think was on here but eating lunch and just needed to hear it again. All right. And then we ask you to sign up for our updates, please. Sign up for our updates, but then also challenge somebody next to you, or if you're headed to another workforce meeting, we know we have a lot of those in our states, these convenings. So sharing these resources, sharing the webinar, and having your partner sign up for our issue updates. And then lastly, like everyone else, follow us on social media, tag us, like it, repost it. But then also, as you're sharing things in your advocacy areas, efforts in your communities, we can't be everywhere, but we can be on social media. So if you're doing something neat at home, tag us in it. Tag us and share so we can elevate your voices as well. With that, I'll pass it over to our network so we can just start addressing some questions.
Yeah. Yeah, let's get into Q&A. And just before we do that, just want to echo what Nikisha said. We're really cognizant that there is a lot going on at the federal level between reconciliation implementation, and now the appropriations process is starting, and there's several different executive orders to track. We know it's a lot to track, and we know that you all have full-time jobs in your communities as training providers or community college leaders or state officials. So we hope that NSC can continue to be a resource for you, continue to track what's going on. And we will have more of these network calls. We know we go over a lot in just 40 minutes, but hopefully it's useful. And if we don't get to your question today, we are happy to follow up via email. Yes, go ahead, Nikisha. Did you want to start with a
Yeah, I was going to
question?
start with one. We received a question. Thank you guys for registering and submitting questions. How can disparity-focused groups not run afoul as we think about anti-DEI policies? And I just want to say that we've been speaking to a lot of stakeholders around this. And I feel like we're in a safe space, and I don't want to say anything that can be weaponized against us. But I want to say that we're seeing a lot of our partners shifting to things that are relative to the community. For instance, they're having a focus on zip codes, certain zip codes for communities. Also other things that are not, especially as we talk to some of our partners that are in red states and have really big anti-DEI pushes, they're using other strategies to, with the intent and the spirit of WIOA is what they like to say, with the intent and the spirit of how it was initially, when it was re-signed by Barack Obama, how it was initially to be led in our communities, and they're using other other data points to ensure that those populations are included, but they're also coupling it with an ROI. A return on investment. And they've been seeing a very positive response when they're able to talk about investments in the system, not just from a monetary standpoint, but from a staff allocations and the resources that are going in and the returns that it's putting back in the economy, how these individuals are contributing, have, and continue to, and showing that, and especially as they're thinking about some re-elections in areas. So they're going all the way down to mayor conversations too, to help amplify those voices. And so what I would say is, as we think about the anti-DEI, we think about other correlating data points who still represents our communities that we need to serve, that expand beyond sometimes just the things that can be trigger words in our state.
Amazing. Thanks for going over all that. I know that's a issue that's top of mind for our network. We also got a question here from someone very with a keen eye who asked what's going on with WIOA reauthorization negotiations. I think a lot of the people on this call will know this already, but just to provide a quick, brief background, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is and has been up for reauthorization. There was a bipartisan bill that moved very far forward in Congress up till the end of last year, and then ultimately was pulled from the omnibus. And so the thought was that that bipartisan bill that had made so much progress would sort of be the starting point for reauthorizing WIOA this Congress. But the president's proposal to consolidate workforce programs under one block grant has it conflicts with the WIOA reauthorization, which does not do that. And so now we see our friends in Congress on the Education and Labor Committee and on the Help Committee in the Senate sort of at an impasse of what to do. Do they move forward with this bipartisan bill, or do they follow what the administration is asking for? And so that is sort of in limbo about what they will do and how they will manage it. So that is really the update there, which is, I know, is kind of a non-update, but we are still actively engaging with members of the administration and Congress to follow that update.
Thank you, Caroline. I wanted to answer, we received a question around short-term Pell. Working with WIOA funding, and I just want to point out something that was in the talent strategy report around how the agencies has it as a directive or a goal of implementation to work with governors and states. So I think that's a way that, not I think, but that is a way that NSC is going to help influence that work, right? Because we're understanding that WIOA as it operates different in different states, but we think that if we can help facilitate those conversations and the implementation and how these two are going to work together, by having the right partners on board, we can also shape the implementation, but then also point out key challenges, right, that we're having amongst just the investment pieces or other challenges of streamlining some of those programs. And so, again, the goal of these agency meetings is for us to have the direct conversations and direct dialogue, but also to influence and shape the implementation with the experts like yourself on the ground. So that is just that was very vague in the report of how they're going to, but that was an opportunity for us. If we see that it's not spelled out, there's opportunity for innovation and a space for our network leaders and experts to help them think about it.
Cool. I'm going to answer another question here. Someone who is plugged into what's going on in Congress asked, the OMB director hinted that withheld or released education funding could possibly be included in a rescission package. Is there any update? So yes, some folks on the Hill and in the administration have been talking about wanting to do another rescissions package. Currently, I don't think there is enough support in Congress for another rescissions package. And I think things like education funding, clawing that back, would be much more controversial and hard to get the votes for compared to, less controversial policy items. So right now it doesn't look like there is enough congressional support to get another rescission package, but President Trump, of course, is very influential in Congress, and if he, puts his weight behind another rescission package, there could be some changes there. But for now, that does not look like it's on the horizon. And Jaren, can I ask you a question from our network that we got that maybe you might be best to answer?
Sure, why not?
Okay, great. So it's a question about skills-based hiring, the value of skilled credentials in the changing environment, especially as higher education takes a hit. So not really a question, but just wondering if you have any thoughts on that in general.
Yeah, so I really do want people to look forward to this October 15th report that Business Leaders United is putting out. But what I can tell you is that Amanda and myself and one of our consultants have been doing a lot of work on just better understanding the landscape of small and mid-sized employers and their connection to credentials in this report. And what we're finding is that credentials are important as people progress in a career pathway. They may not be the first thing that people are looking for, especially in the manufacturing and construction industries who we interviewed, like as an entry-level position, because a lot of the times, and I know you guys are not gonna think this is a wild thing, that they are hiring for soft skills or power skills or durable skills, that whatever the terminology is, but they do want people to have technical skills, whether that's a training that they implement as an incumbent worker training, or if they're connected to their community college. So we want it. So that was one of the things that we saw, is that was no matter what, credentials were important as they moved up and progressed in a career pathway. Some employers were doing it better than other employers were doing it, and we kind of get into the employers of choice conversation. As the employers were telling us they wanted to be employers of choice. So that's what you'll see in the report in the skills credentials, and skills first hiring. The other thing that you'll probably want to know is just like the support that a small and mid-sized company would need to implement this is a lot more capacity, probably held by like an intermediary, a community college, a workforce board that could support them in figuring out what the skills are that are necessary for the job description so that they can actually get to a point of hiring for skills, because they might just not have the time. They might just be putting in the same job description every time, even though it's 5 years down the line. So if you could just support them in making some of those things happen, and then that makes it easier for them to develop the curriculum they need for those skills. But look for that report because I think it'll be helpful. Who's next? Keisha.
Yeah, I was looking through. Caroline, I know it's a question about CTA and the data systems. I'm not sure um, what data system under CTA has the ability to include. Um, I know you're in a lot of coalition meetings, so I don't know if I'm pretty sure we haven't got to that point of it to determine the data system. Um, but do you see that question?
I do. Let
Okay.
me just take a look at it again. Um, yeah, I think as you said, Nikisha, I don't think we're at that point where we know if those credits outside of college will be included in CTA yet. If CTA were to pass, it would most likely have a negotiated rulemaking process similar to the one that we're seeing in short-term Pell now. And so that would be where we could bring up some of these implementation questions that this person in the chat has.
Okay. And then there was a question around actions on appropriations, like some key dates. And so I just want to say
Yeah.
in August, so late August, right now, until October 1, as far as engaging, I will say if you're choosing to engage on your own, if there's a way that you can update us, just to ensure that we can amplify voices and we can one band, one sound. I love that movie Drumline. And so that way we can make sure we're supporting you and we're having conversations as well and lifting up your issue areas. But yes, and so from now until we can see that October 1 and just stay keep us on your priority updates, because as things change, our colleague who's not with us today, Megan, will definitely be sending out alerts and actions that'll also involve me and Caroline to alert and organize you.
Can I just make a suggestion too, is that, I mean, I'm sure their calendars are busy because they're home right now. But in the times that their Congress is home, like now and then in November again, I also would recommend that you talk with your business leaders about tours that they could go on, especially in certain districts where business leaders are influential, because I don't know, I don't always know if small businesses are reaching out to say like, hey, come look at my facility, but I'm sure they would love to have their congressman come and visit. So if there's time on the schedule, then preparing for those conversations and making sure that your leaders are talking about workforce is super important in that, and making sure the business leaders are also following through with that.
And just to build on that, Jaren, like, right, as we think about reaching out, being a part of our Skill Span Coalition and Business Leader United creates a comprehensive, like, right, approach to members of Congress, also leveraging some of the relationships we have. And so as small businesses, we know that can be a heavy lift to host a tour for someone of that size and influence, right? And so we've been known and we have expertise in helping facilitate those visits with other industries who share some of the same challenges, right? Regardless of where the tour is, it's an industry conversation. So inviting guests and hosting it that way in a consortium style is something to consider too. And so also, if you're having a hard time leaning in, on your members, leaning into us as your network experts on the Hill, to see how we can leverage our relationships as well. And with that, we
So-
have 4 minutes. Go ahead, Caroline.
No, I was gonna say, I feel like we're right at the hour here. If you submitted a question that didn't get answered, please reach out to Nikisha or I. Is our contact information at the end here? Yes, and, oh, maybe not. But we'll drop them in the chat and include them in follow-up resources. As Nikisha said, thank you so much for spending an hour with us. Thank you for being a part of our network. Anything else you want to say to close us out, Nikisha?
No, I was going to say thank you for joining us on a Monday. Continue the good work, continue the good fight, and just know we're here to help you along the way. So I appreciate you. Until next month.
Yes. Thank you all. See you next time.
Yeah.